From the headquarters of Talasio English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Suni Gray. We begin in Colombia, where students have taken to the streets once again to demand guaranteed funding for public universities. Students, along with trade unions and other social movements, have been protesting for weeks against the government of President Ivan Duque. Many of the demonstrations have been met with fierce repression from the police. The students say the government has the money to boost the education budget, but that it lacks the political will. Our correspondent Juan Manuel Jimenez in Bogota has the details.
We are here at the National Square in the center of Bogota. This is one of the places where students have gathered and also met with different trade unions. Student-led strikes have been going on for almost 2 months by now. They've been calling on Ivan Duque's government to solve issues around education financing for this year and raise the budget for the next year. They are essentially demanding the complete restructuring of policies on financing public higher education. There are 32 public higher education institutions in the country. They are also discussing higher education opportunities for students from lower-income families. Since the beginning of November, there are about 12 negotiations have been held between students and the government. However, despite these meetings, the government continues to state there are no funds available. The students have suggested various proposals to overcome the university's financial difficulties and also to improve their infrastructure. Students say these universities are literally falling apart, and the government negligence is not justified. These public universities, they say, could easily become the future of the country if the government will be willing to invest in them more. The student protesters have also condemned that the President Ivan Duque has not even once sit down for talks with them directly over the last 2 months.
Thousands of Central American migrants are still in the Mexican state of Tijuana, waiting for an answer to their asylum requests from the United States government. Human rights organizations have criticized the shelter conditions for migrants in Tijuana. Meanwhile, Mexico's Foreign Minister, Marcelo Ebrard, has traveled to Washington to analyze the creation of a joint plan which guarantees the necessary resources to allow the migrants to stay in Mexico while they await the result of their application process. And Pablo Perez has sent us this report from the U.S.-Mexico border.
So 19 days after the migrant caravan arrived here at Tijuana in the border within Mexico and the United States, the High Commissioner for the Human Rights of the United Nations Organization, Michelle Bachelet, stated that those migrants, especially refugee seekers, human rights must be respected all the time. It does not matter if they are accepted or not on the country of destiny, or if they are on transit, if they are walking, or if they are on a shelter. The care of those people, particularly children, and their human rights, it's the most important things that must be taken care of. Something that has been a concern for a lot of people since they started the journey 2 months ago in San Pedro Sula.
We switch gears now. The NGO Life in Leggings, a Caribbean alliance against gender-based violence, began as a hashtag which women around the region used to share their stories about harassment. Leggings because a wide cross-section of women wear leggings, and harassment doesn't care about class or what you're actually wearing. And since we're still observing the UN's 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, we wanted to take the time to highlight the experiences of Caribbean women, since the region is still the most violent in the world for women and girls, according to the United Nations. Hi, Ronald. Thank you so much for joining us. So to discuss the gender-based violence in the Caribbean, we are being joined by Ronald King, who is the creator of Life in Leggings. I'm trying to figure out where to look. Ronald, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So really quickly, why did you start Life in Leggings?
Well, I started it from based on personal experiences, but it was just general frustration from how we as women in the Caribbean are treated.
And why start an NGO? Because Life in Leggings started as a hashtag online. You got a lot of responses from women throughout the region, not just in Barbados. Let's just emphasize Life in Leggings started in Barbados because you're Bayesian, but it went viral across the region. And a lot of women were using the hashtag to detail their experiences of harassment. So, but why turn it into an NGO?
Well, we knew that the space, the hashtag was created as a safe space so that women across the region and in the diaspora, because it did travel as far as Japan, China, wherever Caribbean women were, they utilized the hashtag. The reason behind turning it into NGO is because there's always more to be done to address gender-based violence. And we needed to take it from online to offline and really get into beginning to address it.
And what does the Life in Leggings NGO do? What sort of work are you all doing now that you've been incorporated as a company?
Right. So the NGO is still relatively new. We've expanded into the region. We've started tracking femicides in the Caribbean region. We've started as well as releasing regional call to actions looking for missing girls, because we realize, especially in the region, there's a hypersexualization of especially Black girls where they go missing and persons don't really take it as seriously as they should. We've done lobbying, for constitutional, legislative, and policy frameworks to address gender-based violence, and support grassroots organizations on the ground in the region who've been lobbying for years and basically like amplifying their voices to get those changes.
Now, Ranel, you're doing really good work. You've been recognized. You're one of the 2018 Queen's Young Leaders. So what advice do you have for Caribbean governments as it relates to gender-based violence, reducing our very, very high rates, because the Caribbean and Latin America has some of the highest rates in the world, and stemming, our incidents of rape and that sort of thing? What should Caribbean governments be doing policy-wise?
Well, they should be listening to the women, listening to the organizations on the ground that work with these women, because your country cannot be sustainable. It cannot go forward if half the gender is held back. If we have to deal with these issues, it means that we're not living to our full potential. We're not feeling safe in our countries. We're not able to, contribute as much as we would like to, and live full lives, most importantly. So,
and
yeah.
Ranel, you're very young. What has really inspired you, or what keeps you going with your work in this fight against reducing the high rates of gender-based violence in the Caribbean?
Because every woman has the fundamental right to feel safe in public, private, and virtual spaces. And especially because I don't want the next generation to experience what I had to experience. I believe that it's each of our civic responsibility to make the changes that are necessary. We benefit from changes that our ancestors made and the resistances that they led, so that we don't have to experience what they experienced. And so we continue that, ensuring that the future generation doesn't experience what we did.
And really quickly, I wanted to end on a positive note. So what are some of the things that have made you very proud in doing your work on fighting gender-based violence in the last 2 years? What are some of the biggest gains that you've achieved?
I think it is regional awareness, especially with the targets that we didn't, we expected major backlash from men. But I find, especially in the Caribbean region, in certain countries, we've gotten a lot of support from men as well, and they've done some reflection on how they contributed to the problem, what they can do to address it, and more importantly, hold their fellow brothers accountable to do better in future.
Thank you so much for chatting with us. We've been speaking to Ronelle King. She is usually based in Barbados, but right now she's in Trinidad. And we've been speaking to her about her work in the fighting gender-based violence throughout the Caribbean. Thank you so much for joining us, Ronelle.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll take a short break now. More news in a minute.
acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have signed a number of contracts during an official meeting in Moscow. The two are reinforcing petroleum energy agreements and have guaranteed investments of more than $5 billion to raise oil production between the oil companies PDVSA and Rosneft and several joint ventures. They also signed agreements to guarantee investment of more than $1 billion in the area of mining. Venezuela will also be importing more than 600,000 tons of Russian wheat.
We are guaranteeing an investment of $1 billion for mining production, particularly in gold. We have also signed a contract to guarantee all of the wheat for Venezuela, 600,000 tons of wheat for the Venezuelan people's bread. We have secured the wheat supply for 2019 and beyond.
And our correspondent was in Moscow for these meetings. Here's a report from Telesur's Hansel Oro.
The aim was to strengthen an already close relationship. The presidents of Russia and Venezuela met at the government residence in Novo Ogaryovo, just outside Moscow.
We have settled on the best way forward. We are putting into action a wide-ranging economic program which fits perfectly into our shared vision of cooperation between Russia and Venezuela.
President Putin condemned the pressure exerted by some foreign governments to promote violence against the Bolivarian revolution, including the failed assassination attempt against President Maduro and his ministers on August the 4th in Caracas.
We support your efforts to reach a mutual understanding in Venezuela and to establish relations with the opposition. We condemn any acts of a clearly terrorist nature and any attempt to change the situation by force.
I am very happy to be here, and I know things will only get better in the future. We are standing up and resisting. We have suffered all kinds of aggression and threats, and this has been a learning process.
The strategic relation between these two countries includes areas like energy and mineral exploration, as well as technical, military, educational and cultural collaboration. According to the Kremlin, trade and other economic exchanges between the two countries totaled $68.4 million in 2017. And in the first 9 months of this year, that increased to more than $79 million. A sign that the ties between Russia and Venezuela are growing stronger.
Venezuela is commemorating 20 years since the first electoral triumph of the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution, Hugo Chavez. A massive march in Caracas was convened by the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. Chavez won the presidency with 56% of the votes, far surpassing his closest opponents at the time. The leader of the Bolivarian Revolution initiated a number of social inclusion policies for some of the country's poorest. His reforms dramatically reduced social inequality in the country. And the Mauricio Macri-led administration has dealt yet another blow to Argentinians. The Congress has approved a personal property tax reform. The bill was passed in the lower house with 121 votes in favor, 65 against, and 27 abstentions. The tax initiative will have a direct effect on middle-class property owners who will now be paying higher taxes. At the same time, lawmakers opposed to reform argue that it's the rich who stand to benefit the most. And staying in Argentina, hundreds of representatives of small and medium-sized businesses gathered outside Congress to request urgent measures to mediate the effects of the country's economic recession. Under the slogan "Against the Crisis, Small and Medium Enterprises Move Towards Congress," 8 business entities, which group companies from all over Argentina, organized the gathering. They are denouncing the closure of 25 companies per day on average under President Mauricio Macri. And our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more details.
Outside of Congress, small and medium business owners have gathered. There are more than 800,000 companies which generate work in the country. Since Mauricio Macri's government came into office, there's been a great crisis in the sector. More than 10,000 companies have closed and more than 107,000 workers were left without jobs. 10 shops are closing each day because of the loss of production and sales. Argentine business owners are demanding that the country's lawmakers create laws to assist these small businesses and create alternatives to get out of the crisis. Difficulties lie ahead, it seems, at least according to the policies which have already been announced by Macri's government.
Police in Peru have arrested the country's Football Federation chief, Edwin Oviedo, on suspicion of involvement in a corruption ring that involves judges and businessmen. He was arrested during an early raid on his house in Lima. This is Oviedo's second run-in with authorities in recent times. He's currently awaiting judgment in a case in which he's accused of ordering the assassination of 2 trade unionists at a sugar company he controlled. Churches in Peru have come together to form a joint initiative to save the Peruvian Amazon rainforest. The initiative comes a year after the Pope expressed concern about the alarming deforestation of the Amazon, which covers almost 2/3 of the country. The Peruvian Amazon has in recent years experienced high rates of deforestation due to gold mining. This is a key factor behind global warming, accounting for around 15% of annual emissions of heat-trapping gases.
I think that we're doing something in looking to create awareness about how important the Amazon is. Not just for those who live there, but for the whole country. And not just for the country, but for the whole world, really.
And now we continue with Telestio's special series of reports from Brazil on the Cuban doctors who have been recalled by their government after Jair Bolsonaro criticized the program. In this latest report, we dive into the heart of the Amazon for the last meeting of Cuban doctors before they leave the area.
Dr. Arnaldo Cedeño Núñez wasn't able to say goodbye to his indigenous patients before leaving to his native Cuba. He learned about the suspension of Cuba's More Doctors program in Brazil after returning from his bi-weekly visit to the remote Bona village in the heart of the Amazon. But in the town he was based, his staff and patients bid him a tearful farewell.
Although people at Bona village lacked electricity and internet, I have never needed that. I just needed people to believe in me and my work, so that I can do what I enjoy the most, helping people. I want them to know that even though I will be far away, the Apalai people will always remain in my heart. I will never forget their village. It was a special place. Thank you for everything. I send you hugs and I wish you the best, but most importantly, I hope that God sends a doctor to that place soon. Someone who can help you the way I wanted to continue to do so.
Cedeño is leaving for Cuba soon, so he had to take a break from farewells and pay one last visit to patients who will remain without a doctor after he's gone.
Many things happen here, and as you can see, the distances between settlements are big, so attending patients is very difficult. Now that the program ended, we lost a doctor who looked after all of us. The indigenous community was astonished at his departure.
Merely 20 days after assisting in a childbirth with no complications, Cedeño was called to the newborn baby who was in serious condition. But after the Cuban doctor left, the baby was left without any medical checkups for more than 2 weeks.
If the case is not followed, it could lead to a severe malnutrition. An accompaniment that preferably should be done with a doctor, and in this case they will not have that opportunity.
Nearly 90% of the indigenous population depended exclusively on the assistance of Cuban doctors. Bolsonaro's aggressions that ended the assistance program coincides with his intention to extinguish the indigenous demarcation of lands, 2 sides of the same coin, in a genocide that began centuries ago.
To Mr. Bolsonaro, I say to him that he always speaks in the name of God, who was the creator of the universe. But on the other hand, he has projects against the indigenous populations that are also sons of God. We cannot accept that.
Those left behind get news of the Cuban doctor who could not say goodbye to his indigenous patients. The Apalai Huayna embraced the doctor who set foot on his territory, and of course they said goodbye with the fermented mandioca brava drink, known as cachiri. This drink is used to recreate the rituals that the ancestral heroes of this ethnic group performed.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. At least 4 people have been killed in the Dominican Republic in an explosion at a plastics factory. Fire crews and the army rushed to the scene in the capital, Santo Domingo, to search for anyone trapped in the debris. The head of the fire brigade said the blast was caused by a gas leak inside the plant. President Danilo Medina promised support for the families of the victims. Classes were suspended in schools in the vicinity. And as of 8 a.m. on Thursday, a number of Cuban mobile phones began receiving SMS notifications to enable a new mobile data package. The country's telecommunications company, FtS, began its data launch for 3G-capable devices. Mobile phone users will be sent details on data operations from December 6th to 8th. Cuba will also have 1,200 Wi-Fi access areas by year's end. Jamaica's government is vowing to take action after a damning report on the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica and its affiliate Petrojam has uncovered explicit acts of nepotism at both entities. The Auditor General's report has also pointed to serious deficiencies in human resource recruitment and management practices. The probe also found that the state-owned oil company Petrojam made questionable payments related to procurement activities. In response, Prime Minister Andrew Holness says his government welcomes the report and will take further action.
What has caught my eye of great interest is the issue with the pricing. That is something that we will have to take a very serious look at. Issues to do with the infrugality of the use of public resources, that has to also be addressed. I believe that you could say that this is a watershed moment for transparency and accountability in Jamaica. The government welcomes the report and will take further action as recommended and guided by the report.
Protests have continued in France against President Emmanuel Macron's economic reforms and the deterioration living conditions. Police in Nantes used tear gas grenades to disperse students who had blocked the entrance to their schools and set a car on fire. The Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, announced on Wednesday that he was calling off the fuel tax increases planned for 2019, in what many saw as a desperate bid to end the protests which have rocked the country. Climate negotiators are continuing their discussions behind closed doors at the COP24 conference in Poland. But outside the main meetings, climate change activists have put on their own mock awards to bring attention to the insincerity and hypocrisy of some of the participants. The mock Fossil Fuel of the Day award was unanimously given to Saudi Arabia. Stock markets have responded to two major events unfolding around the world. News is emerging from the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries as they meet in Austria, whilst Chinese firm Huawei's chief financial officer was arrested in Canada on Wednesday, affecting markets dramatically. The price of oil was dropped by at least 4% after Saudi Arabia suggested that producing countries might cut output by less than expected. Meanwhile, the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, who could be extradited to the United States, threatens to destabilize already fraught relations between China and the U.S. And we end with news that the Senegalese President Macky Sall has inaugurated the Black Civilizations Museum in the capital, Dakar. The museum has been described as the largest of its kind and has the capacity to hold up to 18,000 exhibitions. The exhibition halls include the show African Now, showcasing contemporary African art, and the Caravan and the Caravel, which tells the story of slave trade across the Atlantic and through the Sahara, giving rise to new communities of Africans in the Americas. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusenglish.net. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you for watching.
Sentí el latido